Let's roll. This is Countercharge, your podcast for ranks, flanks, and kings of war. Join your hosts as they delve into the world of Panithor and bring you worldwide coverage of all things Kings of War.
Welcome to Countercharge. I'm Luke Schafer.
And I'm Matt Croger. You heard from Luke on our Clash of Kings Australia episode 2025, and now we're going to be getting him into the List Builder studio. And so we will cover a bit more of his origin story, because I think you've been on once before the Clash episode, but a long, long time ago, right? And I can't remember if we actually did your origin story.
There wasn't. I've been on twice. There was when I was a newbie, quite a number of years ago, and we did do an origin story there. And I was also on for a Masters Council chat, I think it was.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Well, let's do a quick review of your origin story, given it was so long ago. But how'd you find gaming, and then specifically, how'd you find Kings?
So, like most of us, or a lot of us at least, Warhammer Fantasy was my first war game. Friends of the family introduced me to that back in the 90s. Fell in love, just wanted to play that all the time. Life got in the way. They all went into a box for a number of years, along with my 40k that I picked up with a few friends. It was actually when I pulled them out to sell it all off, because it was just sitting in a box doing nothing, that it reignited the spark. And I got back into fantasy at the end of 7th, just in time for it to roll to 8th and then explode. So I managed one tournament in that time and maybe a dozen friendly games before it all went away again. So then, they went back in the box. Like, I'd heard of Kings of War at that point, but didn't know how seriously to take it. I did sort of listen to some of the podcasts and that at the time. And then just sort of, again, took a backseat to life until I decided, I want to start playing war games. I started investigating. This is just at the tail end of Wargamer AU, just before it got shut down. So I asked around on there, and are people playing Ninth Age, or are they playing Kings of War? And Neil from Brisbane hit me up and said, I can give you a game of Kings of War sometime. So I that was enough for me to just go, you know what, I'm in. I just started building an army, found the Countercharge Discord, jumped on there while I was painting, and that helped me get through painting my my undead, and meeting all those guys on there. And then so got one intro game from Adam Story, who didn't hold any punches, and thrashed me for my first game, and then I did a tournament and have been in it ever since that.
Actually, I remember now about the time you joined. The Queensland scene was well known for its uber competitive nature and tough lists. Not nice people, but like the list being tough, and they're all very good gamers. I remember that now. And it sounds like the competitive aspect was something that you've always enjoyed about the various war games.
Yeah, I like to think about the game a lot. Ironically, with Warhammer, it turns out I preferred thinking about the game a heck of a lot more than I preferred playing it. The anticipation of the game was where all the fun was. The game itself was a chore.
And probably the list building as well, I'm imagining.
Yeah, different. They're different beasts, though. I actually came into Kings of War thinking list building's a bit boring. I have a different opinion now. I think it's quite good, but yeah, the different style of list building for sure.
Yeah. And so it sounds like once you found Kings, though, you were pretty hooked. You didn't dabble a lot. I mean, of course, you play Firefight now, and you've got your podcast Controlled Fire, but that it was your bread and butter, your main staple for a while.
Yeah, I don't like to really be into too many games at once. People keep asking me, "Are you doing Epic Warpath?" And I'm like, I just can't. I have been roped into Blood Bowl now, though, so I'm going to give that a crack.
Oh yeah.
Had to do a deal to get some people to come to a Kings of War tournament. They said, if you come to our Blood Blood Bowl game, I'll come to your tournament. And I'm like, all right. So now I find myself in a league, and I've never even played a game, so that's fun. I do like Dead Zone and Firefight quite a bit, and play them. Dabble in a bit of other things like Gaslands and whatnot as well. But Kings of War still is kind of the staple game there.
Yeah, great. And it sounds like you immediately got into the competitive scene with Kings and have just stayed there. Like, do you get much midweek gaming in, or are tournaments kind of your main form of gaming?
Now that I've got a dedicated space that I can host games, I've gotten a bit more midweek gaming in. There's always the club as well, where I often try to get down for a game or two, but a lot of the club people are playing Firefight, and that's their preferred game, so I'm tending to play more Firefight at the club, though. But yeah, my second ever game of Kings of War was at a tournament, which was quite a funny day, actually, because I did manage to get a win there, which was nice. But in my second ever game was my first game at that tournament, and it was against Chris Wilcox Skeletor, and I had a scouting vampire on a horse, and he's like, "Oh, okay." So I charged into some dwarves on some rangers on turn 1 and disordered them, and then turned his position to really mess up this lord. So I corkscrew charged around turn 2 around him into the rangers behind, and this guy's just like, he just did a corkscrew charge on his second ever game. What's going on? He did then turn around and smack me and take me down, but I think he was a bit shocked and wondering what's going on. But I actually think it was Direct Misfire, to be honest, which was the podcast that I listened to that made me really think that the strategy of the game is about the movement and the I always say, I explain to people that don't know, it's like where you watch those old Roman war documentaries where they show the different legions maneuvering on the battlefield. Those squares. I say it's like that with models. So this whole battalions of guys move around. And yeah, so listening to, I think it was them talk about how to play goblins back in the day, that sort of made me understand how it's a better kind of competitive game, because it's that the movement is what's key.
And I'm assuming you got better by just doing the opposite of whatever they said.
Well, there's a no, they're good guys. And they do know what they're doing. But yeah, I have had some funny points of contention with them in the past. I think the Boomer Chariots, when they got the stealthy thing, they did an army review and they said, I can't see why you would take the Boomer Chariots. And I'm like, what are you talking about? These things are amazing.
Yeah. And then lots of very competitive ogoliths have had them since.
Yeah. But I mean, you're picking up something and you're just skimming it over to do a review, right?
Yeah,
Be forgiven for sort of not understanding some of those things at first glance.
Yeah. And so onto a bit of a hobby update. I don't know. Did Clash light your fire? Have you done any hobby since, or either of the Clashes, I should say, Clash of Kings or Protocols?
Well, it's only been a week?
Yeah.
No. I still had I had painting for both of those tournaments to do in the lead up, and I did have some time over Christmas where I was going to get all of that done, and for various life reasons I didn't. It wasn't just being slack; it was some other things going on, so I didn't get as much hobby done there. So by the time I got around to actually doing it, it was a bit of a rush to finish off my Marauders and what I needed for this army for Clash as well. So I am taking a bit of a break from that. I think I'll just run something I've already got for the next tournaments. We've got 2 1-days in Toowoomba, one for each game again. So I'll just run with things that are already painted. But my actual next plan is to do to start on my Plague for Firefight.
Oh, nice. Yeah. For myself, I was lucky. I had a few things started, but once I punched out my Firefight army, I've been moved on to my pile of opportunity a little bit, and since actually just before Clash, I'd finished a couple of units of Juggers, and since then I've done two lawnmowers and a unit of Braves, and now I'm onto some Poachers. So just trying to punch through some of the stuff that I've got assembled but not properly painted.
So what did you say? Did you look at Dave having some wins with halflings and go, well, if he can win with them,
yeah.
maybe I've got a chance? Huh?
I've had a playable amount of halflings for a while and haven't properly put them on the table because when I started them, I was basically just painting units that I wanted to paint, and it never came into a together as a list that I actually was prepared to put on the table.
You've got some Japanese inspired, like, is it Kingdoms of Men or is it like Nature? Like, don't you have a
my Dragon Empire uses
yeah.
Basileia. Yeah.
Right. So did you think about basing the halflings on the same so you can do Rortia?
No, I didn't think of that. That would have been wise. Too late now.
Well, that's what I'm doing with my plague in Firefight, right? I'm doing them on a laboratory style base so that I can add some GCPS to make Maison Labs.
Oh, nice. That's cool. Yeah. I have to say, I really enjoyed seeing the different flavors of the list at Firefight on that third day down at Clash. I found it. I mean, it's hard, I think, to get ultimate enjoyment when you feel like you're battling to know the rules. Like I've literally played one game with only about 3/4 of my list, but I think the main game mechanics are pretty intuitive.
Yeah.
And so I still had plenty of fun. Yeah. So with that, we might step into the list building studio, Luke. I mean, the man who's got a bit of a reputation for a style of list. Certainly south of the border, everyone likes to, and across seas, everyone likes to give him a bit of curry for his style of lists. And I personally felt going into this that this was actually one of your, going into Clash, actually, that your list was one of your better lists on that it maybe had a little bit more resilience than some. But so first of all, we'll talk about your general list building principles, knowing that you do have more than one style of list. But and then later we might delve into your Clash list. So let's get into it.
The List Builders Studio.
So we'll start with a bit of a generic list building question in terms of like how much do you rate the list building aspect? We touched on it, I guess, in that intro that I assumed you really liked list building in Warhammer, but you said you've come to love it in Kings. So how much do you rate it?
Reasonably highly. Like, is it the list of the player? Like, it's the player, right? I think everyone sort of understands that, but the list does help. Like, I do reasonably well at a lot of events, but I'm straight up like not in the same league as a lot of the other top players, right? I could rattle off 24 players I think that are better than me in the local scene. But what I do is I take for my play style what I think is the best tuned list that I can produce. So that's a bit of a crutch for me. Because I do I take lists that generally play to my style. That's why I don't play my Dead anymore. I think it's a great strong list, but my play style has moved on significantly from when I used to play Undead, and every time I try to play them, I'm like, it doesn't feel right. I have no idea what I'm doing. Just a highly tuned list in your play style. It's why Tracy does so well. There's always, you look at lists and you go, that's such a Tracy list, right? Because he's got a style or a couple of styles that work really well for him, and he tunes those. And you look at them and you think sometimes, how is that only 2,300 points? Like, I don't understand.
Yeah, and I think I firmly believe that play style is strongly underrated by a lot of people in Kings of War. You'll see them going, oh, this is crap or this is crap, but people that will use it well and it just fits for them. And I think you get that within metas too, that like people go, oh, this is crap. And you go, well, yeah, maybe because it's facing this all the time. But if it wasn't, I do think the better players generally do have a style.
Yeah, well, I've received a lot of crap for my Tortured Souls army. So many people saying this is a terrible list. Why would you take it? But it suits me so well that I've beaten, plenty of people I had no right beating with it in matchups that I had no right winning.
Yeah.
there was a convict where there were 3 Night Stalkers players all running terrors. 2 of them are running 3 terrors, and terrors eat torture souls because they're swarms and they get their full rampage. And that's my whole list: heavy infantry and swarms, right? So that the joke there was to them, enjoy your free win, and then I won. And it's just because the list suits me so well that I'm able to play it my way.
Well, I think another classic example that we sadly don't see anymore is he popped in on the weekend was Ken Dunford, who used to run like his 6 regiments of cavalry lists or whatever, and you're like, how is this guy going to compete on scenario? And like literally then basically designed blackjack because people would get belted by him, and then not play scenario. I was like, well, let's power up scenario then, and would still win,
Yeah.
And it was just a style that suited him.
Yeah, his nickname on our chat is Ken Charge Dunford.
Yes,
because that's what he does, and we're very proud of him every time he plays a scenario. But he does tend to win even when he's just playing kill, which is crazy and annoying. Yeah, he's got some like fight wagon lists, which is just like 7 legions.
Yeah, just all the fight wagons. Yeah, yeah. I remember he was building that just before he stopped playing as regularly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there was a Queensland Championships where Adam was going to have to play potentially against. Well, he's going to have to play against Ken. It was round robin, and he thought Ken would take his fight wagon list. So he said, "Oh, can you have a practice game with this with me on UB?" I looked at the list and I went, "How the heck do you play this?" And Adam shrugs and goes, "You charge." And I'm like, all right. So I just did that and I won. Never seen this list played before, and I just charged things and I won. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. He did alpha very, very well. Yeah.
Yep.
And when you're thinking about a new army, what is it that draws it to you? Does it, because you've got that style that most of the time has drifted towards, say, more alpha-y or flying, does it have to have those kind of units in it, or?
No, I mean I do like to sprinkle a bit of the flying with the Frost Talons into my Northern Alliance, but I'm not playing them primarily for flying. Varangur obviously doesn't have those, so I haven't played with the Varangur yet. I do plan on that army being Varangur as well. Look, sometimes it's a unit that I want to play, like Scorchwings. Right, I got into Salamanders originally because Scorchwings were a little bit too good, and I looked at the options of lists that could play Scorchwings, and I liked the look of Salamanders more. Evidently, it turned into me just loving the Salamander army. I think it's really great. I really like a lot of stuff about it, which is really cool. But yeah, so sometimes it's a particular unit. Usually, though, it's just like I build a lot of lists. So I actually brought down the companion temporarily because I wrote a script to bulk delete my lists because there was no anyway. So I bulk deleted my lists at one point just to clear house because it was about 450 lists, and that did something to the database for a little while, and it didn't like it too much. So I build a lot of lists for all of the factions, and so what ends up happening is I either think, oh, that seems like a cool unit, or this seems like a cool idea, or I like this combo, and I'll go and I'll build a bunch of lists around it. And then I end up getting these lists that I just like for whatever reason. I think that's a cool list or a cool army, and then I go from there. So sometimes maybe it starts with a particular unit, but usually it's just that once I've built a couple of lists in that army, I start to really resonate with it and like the sound of it.
Yeah, which seems like it probably starts to move towards ultimately picking based on a play style that you vibe at that time rather than a fluff reason or anything else.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, my Northern Alliance, as I've mentioned before, is meant to be Northern Alliance and Varangur, but also plug the gap of the non-Mantic represented armies like Kingdoms of Men and Green Lady. And I've also got some cool ideas about how to use those to do elves, using like the 2 different kinds of icekins that I've got for different, elf infantry as well, and the Frost Claws with elves on their back as dracons and stuff. So I plan on doing that. But Max beat me to the punch with that. He did his army with the Frost Talons, and his looks about 10 times better than mine ever will. So thumbs up there to Max. But yeah, so like that one is more of a model / I don't know about fluff, but it is more of a modeling decision now with
Yeah.
that army, because I just want that army to be able to be those 5 different armies in a way that um, it's not taking the
Still
piss.
completely clear, right?
Right. Yeah, it's not. I'm not taking the
Mm.
piss. Like, I'm not going, oh, they're a bird, they'll do. I've done that. Like,
Yeah.
the riders change so that they can be representative of the unit. Obviously, things like tribesmen as shield wall, is just it's a straight, I guess, a proxy, right? But they don't make shield wall models, so that's the best we've got. Likewise, my plan is to run the javelin pack hunters as your the spear guys in Kingdoms of Men and that sort of thing. So, but those the humans won't be elves, right? So when I do elves, they will be elves. They won't be humans pretending to be elves.
Yeah. So I think that that's the kind of counts as that's pretty clear on the table, right?
Yep.
Yeah. 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 Okay. And then and so you mentioned that the original inspiration will often come from a unit, but for you, is it that you like the look of a unit, or will it often go on that like power level kind of thing, like you said with Scorch Wings?
Do you mean like the aesthetics of the model, or the rules?
Yeah, or anything else about it that Scorch Wings, I guess you could find cool because they shoot and do combat, but at the time they were also too cheap.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Kingdoms of Men and Green Lady came out because I bought a lot of Frost Claws, like a lot. I have a lot of Frost Claws, enough to make 6 hordes. So I looked at those armies obviously because I'm like, what can I use all these birds in? And so that was kind of looking at that unit and that they work in that army. So that worked for me. Yeah, I mean, there's got to be something in an army that excites me. So it's not like I go, like, this one unit comes out and I go, okay, I've got to do that army. But it's more like, when I look at an army, are there units there that excite me to play? Which sometimes leads me to making, lists in armies that don't use the things that other people tend to be using. Like, I've never played Morlocks in Abyss.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Interesting.
Funny though, like I will build the list before I build the army, right? So I have a lot of like 2,300 point armies that just sit in a box, and that's all that I have for it. And some of them I've added to over time. Others I've forgotten how I even painted and based them. So good luck if I'm going to try and add something that matches.
Yeah. Whereas I'm more the opposite. I end up painting a whole heap of points and then not having a functional army. And then across all your lists, would you say that you have some foundational concepts that you're liking to use, like things that, do cross any list that you write?
I think I tend to operate under the mode of like best in class. So whether that's their stats are extraordinary or they're potentially undercosted for what they do, most of my units can be seen as one of the best options for that role that's available. You probably won't ever see me running warrior hordes in ogres, right? Because for 20 to 30 points more, like, they're costed okay. There's nothing wrong with their costing, but
not
for 20
bad.
or 30 more points, you get something that does so much more than what that warrior horde does. So I'll never run them. They also have to fulfill the role that I have in mind for them, like a specific role. So a good example is Dwarf Warriors in Northern Alliance. If I take them, it's because I've decided I need this unit to sit on an objective, or I need this unit to go out first and take a hit, or whatever the case may be. I'm not just saying I had 115 points left, so I put them in.
Yes,
there's always a reason for choosing everything.
And because ogres are a bit different, and you mentioned you've got dwarves. I mean, one that I've obviously, like, the question probably comes about because of some of your flying lists, but is speed always a concern? Like, would that be a concept that, goes across?
I like things to be as fast as possible. I like, Rhino Cav. I like giving meter madness to my tyrants for that extra range as well, right? I do like to be fast. I do prefer to hit first than to be hit. But if I'm playing something that's a bit slower, it's actually more about, do I have the pieces to stop the double charge on me? Can I layer things? So I either like to be fast or be able to layer.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. And then what about your local scene? So your local meta or a national meta, even like thinking about Clash, I guess, how much do you go trying to predict the meta to go about what you're going to do with your list?
The meta, not really, actually. I don't, it'll change. People will take different stuff. I definitely don't try to beat individual players because you may not even face them. Or they may take something completely different, which is he beat me anyway, the bugger. But Max took a list with a bunch of sharp sticks, like phalanx to beat my flying hordes, and then I took Northern Alliance trolls, and he went, "Where's all the flying?" But I made a big mistake there, and he still beat me. But that was a bit of a funny. It would have been nice to have beaten him and sort of given him one for trying to meta play. But no,
well, there was there was a famous UB too of Dan King versus Tracy. I don't know if you were around when that happened.
Right.
Yeah, and it was a similar thing. Alice got taken to beat Tracy, and he still won. Yeah. Well, yeah, and I mean, like you said, you can't guarantee you're going to run into what you're building against, right? So, Max probably also had a list that you wouldn't have necessarily wanted to run into at Clash because of the better shooting versus your no shooting. Yeah, and you just didn't.
Yeah, I was hoping to not have to face him. I thought, I had a chance, and it was all about. Could I make him split his shots up enough and get enough cover to make them bad shots that he can't easily pop a unit in a turn? If he could kill a unit in a turn, very, very bad times for me. If I could split it up and soften it out, I could heal up enough that it wasn't so big a problem. But I did the actual best strategy, and I avoided him.
Yeah.
That's the best strategy against Max. Just don't play him.
Yeah, exactly.
So the meta, not really. Like, we don't really have super strong we don't have like very, very, very heavy shooting builds for the most part.
Not since Chris Wilcox plays Blood Bowl now.
Oh, mate, he's played plenty of like no inspiring, everything shoots like armies that are just pretty hectic to play against. We don't get a lot of that, and if you do play against them, you just do what you can. So I don't think there's much of a meta choice. Maybe more importantly to think about sort of meta-wise would be something like terrain. We don't have crazy Texas terrain or anything like that here, so we don't have to build lists that contend with that sort of thing as much. We tend to use fairly standard terrain here, so that would be a concern, but we're fairly standard here.
And when you're actually in that list building phase, though, like it sounds like you're looking for the synergies that make a style come together for you. But as part of that, are you considering, what if I come up against shooting heavy? What if I come up against another alpha melee type army? Like, are you taking into account other archetypes, even if it isn't meta?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to. That's kind of the crux of list building. If you,
it's the only way to make it more interesting in Kings in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
To make sure that it does everything.
Like, just at its most basic, why do you take things with crushing strength, right? It's because you expect things to be more than def 3, right? That's of course that's gonna come in every army, but that's the most basic consideration that you're doing. Why crush strength? So I do think about shooting alpha and def 6 as the main concerns. Def 6, I want to make sure I've got I can consistently get out crush 2 or 3 every turn if I need to. So that's usually no problem. With some Bane Chants and that sort of thing. Forsaken to the front with a Bane Chant is Crush 2 Thunder 1, and then on every other turn after that is Crush 2. So, I can crack through Def 6 with that. The shooting is more, to what extent do I have the ability to counter it, for one. So if I don't have that much, I just kind of go, oh well, like if I face heavy shooting, I guess I'm stuffed. But heal or veil or something like that is good to have. I like to have at least some sort of heal or veil or something like that in my lists just to help the shooting matchups. And then Alpha Strike, if I'm playing an Alpha list, obviously I've got fast things, and hopefully I'm faster, or at least as fast, so we can zone each other out, and then the first person to mess up, they lose. If I'm not playing a fast army, so if I'm playing something like ogres, it's all around, like I said before, layer, like the ability to layer. So I'll look at things like, bullies or snow troll primes, because you can put them out in a way that's going to stop the double charge on all your units. So even if they get the first charge, their first charge is going to suck. Warlocks even, right? Warlocks in ogres, I'll put 2, units of something. They used to be Siegebreaker hordes, maybe now they're not. We'll see. Out and you sit a warlock in front of them, but between them, right? So they can't now double charge either of those 2 hordes. And if they charge the warlock, well, they're in for a world of hurt.
Yeah. And are you one that dabbles in UB? Like when you're list building, are you actually trying stuff out and using that as a medium, or are you purely in your head listing?
I don't dislike UB, and particularly through pandemic periods, it was great to get some extra games in, and it's really great to have some games every now and again against the guys I chat to from the US. So that's really cool as well. But it doesn't really affect my list building. I have done like the Boomer list that I've never made, but I wanted to play, so I played that a couple of times on UB. But I tend to use them to sneak in tournament practice, so it's always stuff that I intend to put on the table anyway.
Like you mentioned that you consider perhaps the other archetypes, but what about for you the flexibility of the list in terms of I guess the non-other list components? So whether that be scenario, I mean, you mentioned terrain. Are you taking? I'm assuming you are taking all into that account, and how do you go about it? Like, what are the tools that you're like, I know I need this, other than you said you got to have your crush 2 or 3. Obviously based on your clash list, which we'll go into later, you don't consider shooting necessary.
No, I do really like to have some shooting, but with the shooting, I kind of feel like it's usually a critical mass thing for me. Sure, having a little bit of lightning bolt to just throw out to get rid of a chaff piece is nice, but if you're thinking about like shooting, you have to have enough to worry other lists that shoot, or to be able to take off a unit in a turn, that sort of thing. Like just having like 2 units that do some very average shooting, for their cost, what you're giving up, like tends to, it's why I never play flame bearers in my abyss, right? Because just throwing a couple in there doesn't do enough for my list to warrant their inclusion for the points, because obviously range units are quite costly compared to their melee counterparts. But in that list, I've already got a little bit of lightning bolt to throw out against chaff units, so it's not so big of a concern. So I kind of, one of those 2 is 1 and 1 is none kind of concepts with shooting. If I've got shooting, I want to make sure I've got enough of it to make it a worry for my opponent, rather than just they can throw a couple of wounds on a unit every now and again.
I totally agree there. I have the same kind of feel. It's either, and even with flame bearers in the abyss, I can't. Less than 3 just doesn't seem worth it. And even with 3, then it's almost too many points for too low defense, and you'd want some serious other shooting backing it up.
Yeah. And when it comes to like, general flexibility and that, like I think you can be one-dimensional in your list as long as you understand how that list plays against other archetypes.
Yes.
There's some, having a all def 6 dwarf army with no ability to get extra crushing strength or anything like that is probably a little bit too one-dimensional, because they're slow. They're really hard to kill, but they're slow and they're not going to kill anything in return.
There's other weaknesses as well. Yeah,
exactly. So one-dimensional has to be fairly strong, even if you have a weakness in the army. That's okay as long as you know how to play around that when the time comes. My game against Age at Clash, I didn't have any shooting to get rid of his chaff that was protecting his hard hitters. He would never let me double charge those units, so I had to use a combination of the scenario and how I knew my army played to try and get a win, and only got a draw, but I knew I could guarantee the draw with how I counterplayed the army, even though I had a massive glaring weakness in that matchup.
Yeah, so would you say that, like, if you make the choice basically to do something like which takes it a little bit away from an all-comers list, right? Well, it's not your classic combined arms anyway. The strength needs to be a good enough strength to overcome that weakness. Whereas once you start getting a few weaknesses in the list, usually the strength won't be big enough to overcome it.
Yeah, and one-dimensional list. Like you think about a flying Alpha Strike army, seems one-dimensional, but I mean they're fast and they hit hard, and they've generally got a lot of Def 5 units as well. So that's it's one-dimensional in kind of the kind of army it is that it plays, but it's not really one-dimensional in terms of its positive points. It's got a lot of positives beyond just the fact that it can actually kill things in combat.
When you're putting a unit in, you mentioned, you won't just put something in because you've got the points left over. So would you say that most units go in your list with a really specific role, or do you have like a set of roles set out that you go like, if this happens, this is its primary role, but if something else happens, then it has to switch roles? Like, do most of them have a duality, or how do you think about it generally?
So almost everything's chaff, right? Every unit is chaff when you need it to be. So automatically, if they have any other role that's not chaff, then they've got two roles. Pegasus, it's in there kind of as a chaff piece, but I try my hardest that they don't die because they're so good for claiming objectives. So
the longer the game goes, the better they get.
Exactly. So they can either be thrown away as chaff, or they can be used to score objectives, or throw an extra wound in the front. They've grounded a dragon by charging him in the front. Right? So I threw a Bane Chant on a Pegasus to the front of a dragon and used the reroll to hit, I think, or just wound.
Nice, yep.
Just to make sure. I was like, I have to get a wound here. And he did, to the face, grounded a dragon, happy days. But in the flank or the rear, they're 3 attacks with Thunder 1. So that's, getting in the rear,
still
9
nothing
attacks.
to sneeze at.
Yeah, that's they're going to sneak. They're going to put wounds through, potentially wavering something, or if they're added to another unit hitting in the front, they're probably going to kill it, right? So that's 3 rolls for a Pegasus right there.
Yeah, I do find it hard writing lists with something like a Peg. Any list that has access having less than 2 in it.
Yeah, 3. Like, I wish I had 4. They're that good. So that's kind of why. For me, individuals are something that I struggle to put into most lists because they're not, they're generally not good at, the flanking or the rear charges and that sort of thing. They're not good at being chaff pieces usually, unless they're mighty. Even then, it's scary to do it because if they punch through the mighty, they can still overrun. They can't score, so yes, a lot of them can do 2 rolls because they can be inspiring and they can have like a Bane Chant or a heal or something like that. So that's why I'll, if I do take a banner bearer ever, they've got the, the required loot on there, and that gives them 2 rolls.
Well, I would imagine, it wasn't necessarily the case with this as for you, but more often than not, if you do run an individual, it'll have to be on a horse too, right? Because it's got to keep up with the rest of your stuff. And it's getting pretty pricey on a lot of individuals by then.
Well, in this list, I didn't have them on horses. I couldn't afford them. I am hard about it.
Horse.
Yeah, and I've because there's nothing that could drop and still have the list be functional. And I was having this discussion with Paige from Newbie Dice as well because he was questioning saying, how do you get by without the horse? I'm like, look, theoretically you're right. It doesn't make sense, but you don't want to be charging your army halfway across the table. You use the speed to zone people out and maybe catch some cheeky flanks and that sort of stuff. It's not about yeeting them off to the other side of the board out of inspiring range and whatnot. So, 2 Bane Chants, 3 inspiring sources. I can often get the Bane Chant and the inspiring where I need them when I need them. It's not, sometimes you're like, I've got to leave that unit uninspired so I can Bane Chant because I really have to. Or sometimes you're like, I can't Bane Chant because I have to run them over there to make sure they're inspired. Yes, you do have that hard choice to make sometimes, but the Green Lady being speed 10 obviously, helps a lot with that. But, I think, I think you're playing the army wrong if you're putting yourself in the position where the horse is the determining factor between your victory or not, because it means you're probably playing a bit too cavalier with the army in the first place. And
I guess there's a lot of people that play alpha or let's say have alpha units in, that the temptation is to really like race down the flanks and position hard, isn't it? Right. But there's just as much value in you sitting back, stopping the other person coming towards you.
Yeah, so they're great at like forcing your opponent to move in a certain way, but that doesn't mean they have to charge, that far every turn. Yeah, I did. Yeah, on the weekend I made some turn 2 charges, but that's just because my opponents gave me something that was too good to pass up. Usually, the advice with a list like that would actually be, if you think you should charge on turn 2, charge on turn 3 instead, because your turn 2 charge is probably going
to. Yeah. Take whatever you think and add a turn.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then what about at that list building? Like when you're building it, are you thinking in particular at that point about, I guess, what some people call battle groups or sections with the army, which would often then end up deploying together? Like, is that how are you building synergies within your synergies?
I think if there's an inherent synergy to be had, then yes. So obviously, most of the formations in the game are an obvious synergy. I do think about what works well with certain things, but I don't tend to deploy battle groups, so it would be ludicrous of me to intentionally build them in, because I probably won't deploy them that way anyway. It was a struggle for me on the weekend actually with that formation, because they really want to be deployed together, and there were so many times where I'm like, but I really want one of these hordes over here. And I did that one time, and it worked out fine. But every other game, all 3 deployed together, because that's the group that they are meant to be.
Yeah, and is that because, obviously terrain would come into it, but with your deployment, are you reacting to your opponent much, or are you mostly doing what you want to do, or?
I tend to deploy to the map and the scenario first and foremost, but I will look at what my opponent's doing. It's often not specific units, although if I'm like watching out for a dragon or something that I need to be able to deal with, then yes, I'm looking for specific units. But more, I'm looking for their show of force, or trying to understand what their strategy is coming onto the table. Am I going to want to contest that area that they're putting things down in, or am I going to say now, no, let them have that, and I'm going to go put force over here instead? So it's not necessarily specific units that I'm trying to counter with deployment, but I am also countering my opponent's deployment with where I'm trying to project force.
Obviously, when you're building a list that may have more flyers, they're often expensive. Do you have a minimum number of drops that like you just won't go below? You're like, actually, armies just don't function below X amount of drops?
Yeah, I struggle below 12. 12 is the absolute minimum. Preference is 14. That's usually not that viable. I think I had 13. So that's an okay number for me. Not too happy with it, because 3 of them are individuals. So that only leaves the 10 scoring drops. Was it 10? Yeah. 10.
Yeah.
So yeah, like that's hey, I'd rather have 15 drops, but most of my armies can't really manage that too easily.
So obviously drops is one thing. So if you're having 12 as your minimum, I'm guessing you would want the majority of that 12 to be scoring drops.
Yeah, I mean, coming from playing ogres, ideally all of them be scoring drops. It's one of the strengths of that list. I only take individuals if I really need whatever that individual's bringing. I'd rather, most armies have access to scoring heroes. I'd much rather be taking those if I have any chance, but sometimes it's just not possible.
Yeah, so you'll pretty much maximize your ability to score regardless of the amount of drops. It's unless there's a good reason for it to not be scoring because of what it's bringing, you'll choose scoring every day of the week.
The scoring is kind of a loaded term as well, right? Because yes, they're useful for scoring scenarios, but they're the best things. Like for an ogre warlock can be a chaff piece very easily, because you can't just charge through him. You can't see over him easily. A lot of things, even if they're flying, they can't see over him, or nimble things, because he's height 3. He could do a rear charge and sneak some wounds through. All these scoring heroes. Yeah, all these scoring heroes. They have so many more roles than an individual has. Individuals are just really good at getting to where they need to be. Scoring hero like large infantry and large cav heroes are good at everything else.
Yep, absolutely, completely agree. And then, do you give much thought to difference in size? For example, regiments versus hordes. Is that based on the role you're imagining for it, or anything else? Like, does footprint come into it at all? Like, how are you thinking about your unit sizes?
Yeah, I mean, I'd never play a large infantry legion, right? I've seen them get chaffed up and be unmaneuverable too many times. Same with night hordes. I don't think that they're I'd rather play a chariot legion because at least its frontage is quite narrow comparatively. I think the question of regiments or hordes just generally comes down to exactly what you said. Like what's that unit there for? If you're trying to punch people off, then a regiment of large infantry is not really going to do the job. But as a thick chaff piece, maybe that's a really good size. Infantry hordes and regiments, they're either a dirt cheap regiment for an unlock and a bit of chaff, and maybe an objective holder, or if you're looking for staying power to hold a part of a line, then that kind of needs to be a horde. So unit sizes, I think, I don't think I'm breaking any new ground to suggest that you look at the different sizes and it pretty much tells you the role of that unit in those different sizes, and so you're taking the appropriate size unit for that role.
So you mentioned that you've got your minimum drops. Do you have a minimum unit strength? Do you consider unit strength at all, or is it mostly about scoring drops and drops in general?
No, the first time I knew what my unit strength was for this army for Clash was, I think, when we were playing Rack and Ruin. I was like, how many unit strength do we each have? Like, how hard do I need to contest a zone? And then I looked at my list. I'm like, I've got the same unit strength as you. Great. I don't like scoring drops. To me is more important than the actual total unit strength. Total unit strength only really matters in the only scenario specifically built for total unit strength. Those two are what invade and dominate. The others are all just about can you contest a point better than the opponent, and I tend to contest those better than the opponent by killing their units so that they don't have something there to contest it with. Yeah. But again, with those those unit strength 1 fast nimble things like Pegasus or large infantry heroes, they're great for getting an extra unit strength when you need it to where you need it to contest something, right? So rather than going, I need lots of unit strength in my list to hold things, I just more look at how can I, redeploy certain units to get the unit strength where I need it to be.
Yeah, fair enough. And what about height? So, I think you mentioned people will have heard the Clash episode, Ken using his snow foxes, nuts to butts to protect his chimeras. Are you thinking of height from the get-go, or is it more just you're mostly considering it so you've got the option and then it'll depend on what you see on the table, or like, are you considering it at all?
I do think about it because height for things see over hills primarily, and then also if you've got chaff pieces, you want to try and make sure that your second line units can see over those when the time comes. It's why in my undead I run wraiths instead of revcav troops because they're height 2 and whites can see over them. So that's definitely a concern there. I think it's nice to have multiple heights in your own army for when you need it, particularly if your taller stuff is flying, because that means that you can layer your own units. Being able to put Forsaken behind water elementals was really key for me on the weekend, because water elementals being height 3, the Forsaken can charge over them, and they're height 3 fearless, so they're never in the way really. It's always bonus. Scorch Wings as well, 4 can see over here, they can shoot, take the cover shots when you need them, so what? Doesn't matter, and then they can charge over to where they need to be. So definitely height is something you need to think about more, to not catch yourself out though, rather than a specific strategy.
Yeah, and what about inspiring? I know that certainly early, I think certainly all through second and early in third for me, and for a lot of people, it felt like 3 was the number. Do you have a number that you have to have in? I've found myself over the years trying to move to more, having like 4, particularly if units have a dual role, because then all of a sudden you could have one gone. Do you have a theory on amount?
3 is a nice rule of thumb, right? When you play ogres, obviously you just don't care about inspiring anymore.
Yeah, everything inspires.
You've got like 7 inspiring units. You don't care.
Yeah.
I do consider it. I do think 3 is the number that you want as a minimum generally. If you're going anything less than 3, it better be fast units with very inspiring. And things that are dedicated support pieces as well. So you don't want it to be like, a Duke on winged arrows that might have to fly off by himself. And now he's gone from your force. It's why I tend to try to put an extra piece into my Abyss when I'm running a Seductress, because often she just needs to run off and hold a unit or 2 up for a bunch of turns, and that's potentially nowhere near the rest of your army. So now you're down 1 inspiring. I can function with 2, but I think 3 is the key.
Yeah. Okay. And what about magic items? Are you pro magic items, anti magic items? You mentioned you'll often have the loot if for some reason you're putting a standard bearer in. Where do you sit there?
Well, the list I took to Clash had 1 magic item, and that was Conjurer Staff on the Druid. I think the really key items are, Bane Chant if you need it. Not every list does. If you need it, and if you don't have a spellcaster that you've already got that can take the Bane Chant, then I think that's a good one. Other than that, the main ones are they're more insurance policies. So Conjurer Staff, Piercing Arrow, and Strider Boots. They're insurance policies, and I think that's followed by the anti-waiver items, Staying Stone and that sort of stuff, and the even Blade of Slashing and Mace of Crushing. I kind of fall into this insurance policy realm. It's more to reduce your chances of having a bad turn rather than turning something into something that's going to have a great turn. Situationally, there's other items.
So you wouldn't typically kind of go, oh, it already does this role well, and that this item's going to make it do it better.
No, I've toyed with that, but it tends to make things too expensive, and then you're sacrificing drops, which we've just spoken about. I like to have a certain minimum. I don't like to be too outdropped and have too few options. So I'd rather spend those points on another piece than on all those items. There are some units like Decimator Hordes that really benefit from something like Elite. So maybe that's a good option there. But in general, Conjurer's Staff. And Jesse's Boots are my main 2 items.
And it sounds like you certainly consider spells to an extent. I mean, it sounds like you basically, depending on the list, you don't like to leave home without your Bane Chant. But and you said some damage mitigation, whether that's Veil or Heal. Is that mostly where you'll consider your spells, or does it ever broaden out more than that?
Sometimes, Lightning Bolt or Drain Life if it suits the list and it's not too expensive to purchase. Some wizards they can buy Lightning Bolt, but it's ridiculously expensive. So I don't even bother. Particularly when you're looking for like a dual use on that caster where you want something like Heal or Bane Chant, and now it's like a 200-point wizard, and you're thinking, why am I bothering?
It's too expensive for them to be worth their primary role almost.
Yeah. I don't always take Heal and that sort of stuff, but I do like to have it if I can. Bane Chant would tend to be the typical one, just to make combats count. Sometimes you just got to push through enough wounds and hope for the best, and Bane Chant really helps that.
I'm similar on the Heal or Veil or something. I do feel a bit naked without it if it's not worked its way into the list. But sometimes there's not much you can do about it because, like you said, they can get expensive quickly. Yeah.
I also like Scorched Earth in something like Dwarves as well.
Great spell there. Well, and again, that's a good one of taking something that the army does well and powering it up, right? And probably it's almost like having a really efficient magic item because it's every turn and it's against potentially multiple units, but it makes a good defensive army even better at defense.
Yeah, and the eternal ogre problem as well is like any good choice is just superseded by something better. I used to take Scorched Earth in my ogres, and it was great. It was excellent to have in that list. But casting Lightning Bolt every turn is just a little bit better, right? So I stopped buying it because I found I was just casting Lightning Bolt all the time. The classic ogre problem of you don't do good things because other things are better.
Yeah. And you touched on this in the Clash episode, but obviously command orders are around now. I envisage that most Australian tournaments will probably use them because I think the Australian community has been reasonably receptive to them. And, we've just had an errata drop. Are you going to be taking command points into your list building from the get-go? You mentioned maybe you'd look more towards the different colours now, because I'm not sure now that it's 3 base whether the math will still stand up on spamming red being the most efficient or not. What are you going to be thinking along there?
Yeah, I think there's an argument to be had for 1 blue now, just because it guarantees points. You can't roll 0 on a blue. Maybe that's the way I'll go. I'll have to have a play and figure it out. I think in general with the commands, though, you just got to look at. I don't think that the commands are a strong enough reason to take a faction or to go into a certain build within a faction. I think it's just nice when it happens to line up. If you happen to be playing a faction that has orders that you don't think you want to use or that are very situational for you, well, there's other orders there that are really great that you can spend. It just means you don't dip into the command dice as far, right? But you can still make use of them. There's those rerolls and fast spells, great. The extra dice on your spells, great. There's some good commands there that you can use no matter what.
Yeah, for sure. So at that point, you'd probably just go, well, I'll go with my 3. So for you, it seems like it's going to be probably army dependent based on pretty much do they have good commands or not?
Yep.
Well, we know you're a big fan of speed and flyers, mate. But with that, is it similar to shooting for you that if you're going to go down that path of particularly that more alpha path, that there has to be a critical mass?
Not with flyers. Any flyers, do work. So for my Northern Alliance, most lists I do have 1 regiment and 1 horde, and the horde has Jesse's boots of the Frost Claws. That's not going hard into flying. That's just a little sprinkling, but it gives a flying chaff piece that can get some flanks if it needs to be, and a flying hammer that can project threat further than the rest of the army can. I think that's fine. Which, with a... See, I struggle to put pack hunters into my list now because the little points bump increase, but also I kind of want to go 3 if I'm going to play them, and 3 is starting to take away from the rest of the... It's not that they're bad, like that plenty of people are doing very, very well with them. They're really good, but for the kind of list I'm trying to build in Northern Alliance, 3 feels like a very big investment that takes away from the rest of it.
I think, they particularly without the steady aim, it can be, once you're going down that path, like in my last Northern Alliance list, it was 2 of them, but 1 of the Ice Kin, so to do something a little bit different, even though that's more expensive, but at least there's a different role,
Yeah, what I think I like more is like a couple of Night Raiders in Varangur and then the Conclave or a Magus with Lightning Bolt.
Yeah, fair enough. All right. And then it sounds like you're not overly considering deployment schemes in your list building. You're more considering scenario and approaches based on what you see on the table in terms of terrain and that combination, rather than going, right, well, if I put these 2 things in my army, unless you're using formations, then, they just always have to be together. And so I have to deploy them that way. All this unit strength goes together. It doesn't sound like you're really thinking in that way.
Yeah, that's right. I try to have so I've been called out a number of times over my copy and paste lists, which is just find something you like and take a bunch of them. And there's a few reasons for that. The first is that obviously, like, I found something that I think is good that does a role really well. Like, why wouldn't I want to take a few of them for starters? And second, it's why I struggle to put like magic items on those units, because Strider boots on one just because, they can go where the terrain is great. That's fine. But the others, like, maybe that have situational items, or that have, so maybe one's got Thunderous Charge, but obviously he can't be hindered or he loses that. And then maybe someone's got, fire, or whatever the case may be. I tend to avoid those because I don't want to have to think, hey, is this unit, out of these 4 units, which of these 4 do I put in this particular part of the table? I just want to be able to go, one of these units goes there because I need one of them there. I don't like to go down to the depths of like, well, this one specifically has to go here and that one specifically has to go there, and they've got this unit over there, so I need to put this here and there. That's why in lists like that have lots of viable similar units that maybe each of them might be situationally slightly better in different ways. I'll still just pick my favorite of those and run a bunch of those, because it's less thinking at the table when I'm deploying about specifically which unit goes where, and just being able to go, well, I need a unit here, I need a unit here, I need a unit here.
Yeah. And with that, like you mentioned terrain and particularly related to scenario, and you mentioned that, Jesse's Boots is, as we all know, a very good item, and, would be one of your first picked if when you're thinking about magic items. But with or without it, do you consider, do I have enough terrain mitigation? Like, what are your thoughts there around list building?
Yeah, I like to have some sort of terrain mitigation, because you'll always be fighting in terrain. This time I didn't take the Strider Boots because I was struggling with the points. I was at the pointy end of the points. And I was struggling, but also because I had the formation that has Strider, I just could go, okay, well, any heavy terrain, that's where they can go. I do like to have something in the list for terrain mitigation. I think it's, given that I do combat heavy armies that want to get in there and punch, and they need to be effective when they get there and punch, like I have to have terrain mitigation. Otherwise, it's kind of an uphill battle.
Do you consider every single style of scenario? Like, do you in your mind, and do you clump them into their style of play, like area control, loot objective? Are you when you finish writing a list, do you then look back at it and go, right, I'm going to go through each scenario and know that it can do it?
Like we discussed before, I think that's a super important thing to do in Firefight, because you just can't play some scenarios if you don't have stuff that can do it. In Kings of War, as long as you've got scoring drops, like you can play every scenario. I think though that you have to understand how your army plays those scenarios. So it's not can it play those scenarios. I think most armies can play most. It's just it's how does my army play that scenario? Because when you're player placing things, so obviously control and dominate, invade, those things, they've all got zones that are just set, and you just have to then look at the terrain in your opponent to figure out how to deploy. The other ones with player placed objectives and loot tokens and that sort of stuff, like you have to know how your army wants to play it, and in particular also how your army wants to play that scenario against your opponents, which is why you should always look at your opponent's list before placing tokens, choosing sides, any of that sort of stuff, just so you know what you're up against. I don't think it's really like the scenarios, like, you could make some choices based on scenario in your list building, but I don't think it's necessary.
Yeah, okay. And what about scoring system? It's probably a bit difficult in Australia. Like, pretty much everything seems to use blackjack, so it's probably not really been a heavy consideration for you, I'd imagine.
No, I don't even really think I consider blackjack too much. I just think about the list, like, trying to win with a list, and then blackjack just scores how well I did at that, rather than me trying to, specifically build to sneak out a few extra points in different blackjack scenarios here and there.
Well, and to be frank, blackjack was originally built to reward the win, so that if you won every game, or, the person with the most wins should more times than not end up at the top of the tournament.
Yeah, and I think that's how it usually plays out. Except that Masters where I went 3-2 and ended up second.
Oh, do you know what? I have a feeling that I have a feeling that wasn't the scoring system. It was the application of the scoring system.
Right. Well, I did have a couple of. I think I had my 2 losses were very minor, and my 3 wins were huge. One of them was against you.
Yeah. Because I think there was a couple of early tournaments when there was just the 20-0 system, where there would be like someone with a bunch of draws and barely any wins are able to just like podium basically, and people with a bunch of wins filling well below. But anyway. Do you think then that would be? I mean, like I said, it's hard because we are here. So do you think that if it was a different scoring system, you wouldn't take it into account strongly? It'd be just be more about, well, this is my army, this is how it plays, is the way it is.
Yeah, I don't think so, because I'm not going to try and be any more killy than I already am, and vice versa. I don't think I could, make myself be any less killy than than I already intend to be. I don't really think so. I just play the game. I play that game against that person and that list in that scenario to win, and how well I do that is my score at the end of the day. So it doesn't really bother me about the scoring system. Yeah. I think there's I've heard people complain that certain armies' results get skewed by the scoring system, but I'm going to play the army I want to play, and either the scoring system's helpful or not, it doesn't bother me.
I think often when comments are made about scoring systems or whatever, or what's better or what's worse, there's actually so many variables and so much bias that the opinions are often heavily skewed because of a certain experience. And, you build or play to your expectation in a lot of ways, right? Like when withdraw, the whole debate about in versus out, there's a lot of thing about, tactical gameplay or that, but then there's the argument of, well, yeah, except that you would change how you play completely by not being there.
Yeah.
So like, can you say that when you gave that opinion that you truly changed how you played to support it not being there? Yeah. I think there's just so many variables, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. What about clock? I'm guessing that other than having to really think about should I go or not, or what you're doing, that, clock isn't really going to be a thing for you in terms of playing into your list building.
No, I mean, I already hate painting infantry hordes, so I don't often have to roll dice for them. Look, yeah, not overly. Like the lists that suck the most on clocks are the ones with lots of dice, right? But I roll quickly. Like I figured out pretty early on to do better on the clock is to do the things that are quickly. So like the things that can be quick, do them quickly. So when I'm dice rolling, I go, okay, I need 3s and 4s, right? And go bang bang, and I've got my set number of dice. And if I do a flank charge, instead of like trying to count out another 18 dice or whatever to add to the mix, I say I'm doing this twice. Bang 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 bang, you're done. So I don't really factor that into list building. Like I've done lists up that have, I've done the goblin list that I've nearly done because there's those cool the 3D printable gnomes that people are using for goblins, and I thought I'd really like to have one of those armies. So I did up a few goblin lists, and you look at that, and it's 6 hordes of rabble or whatever, and you go, that's a lot of dice to roll. But I just kind of just roll with it and hope for the best if that's what I wanted to do.
Does turn 7 come into your thinking at all, or?
But for list building, no, but definitely like choosing whether or not to go first and second. That sort of concept can.
Yep. Okay. And what about when a new Clash of Kings comes out? So obviously, well, until now, it's been every year. Is that when the bulk delete comes out and you start again, or will you generally go back and go, oh, how does Clash affect my current lists, or how does it generally change what's happening for you?
Unfortunately, it's been a trend that every Clash nerfs my lists.
I'd say there's a reason for that.
I've had a habit of picking up lists based upon the Clash changes. So the Clash
Yeah, okay.
Clash comes out, I look at it and I go, oh, I really like this thing about this list now.
Yeah.
So I'm going to pick up that army now, and try and do something with that. Which inevitably, what did I pick? I picked the apparently broken thing that everyone hates, and they're going to change and nerf next Clash. So that's become a bit of a cycle for me. I am trying to break that cycle now, and just and try to not worry about it. But yeah, in the past I've got a lot of armies that pretty much only exist because they did something in Clash and they made it ridiculous. So I decided to build it and play it.
Well, you probably won't have to worry about for a while, mate, because there probably won't be another Clash until the first one of fourth. How much does the hobby side play in? Like, I mean, it sounds like you mostly paint to the list. So have you ever had the situation where you're like, oh, I just love this unit that I've painted, I've just got to get him in the list, or you're never really in that zone?
I play things sometimes just because I have them and I like the models. Werewolves in my undead. Sometimes I'm just like, I like werewolves. So I'll put them in. It definitely affected this Clash because, like I said, I was torn between Northern Alliance and my Green Lady. And Green Lady had less models to paint to get ready than the Northern Alliance list that I wanted to do. So that's why I chose to do that. I think. I do tabletop standard painting, right? I'm not doing competition painting, so I can't really look at my shelf and go, geez, I painted that model so well, I really like it, I want to play it, because I probably didn't. So it's just more, yeah. What do I like? If I've got something that I really want to play, I'll play it. Otherwise, like you said, I'll build the army to the list.
Yeah. Okay. And will your process change? So, like, if the points change, so like 2,300, I'm assuming usually allows you to get more of the toys you want than say 2,000 or 1,900 or whatever. Do you find that you have to completely pivot a list when the points level changes?
I think some concepts that I have don't work at different levels. Like Tortured Souls don't work at higher points values. Like you get over 2,300 and the list starts to become just terrible jank. It does quite well at 2,000 and 2,300. I actually really like different points levels. Again, because I like building lists, and now instead of if you say, hey, there's a 2,300 point tournament coming up, I can open my list builder and I've got like 3 dozen lists ready to go that I'd be happy to play. Whereas when someone says, hey, we're doing an 1,850 point tournament, I'm like, this is awesome. I get to have a play around. I get to go through all of my armies and play around with what an 1,850 point list would look like, and then choose what I like from there. So that's actually a really cool.
I mean, because often it would change significantly, right? Because going from 2,000 to 1,850 isn't usually as simple as changing one unit, because then the whole synergy of the list can be thrown off.
That's right. And you're going to make different choices about, you're going to make a lot more concessions about, I just really need something that can do this thing, and now it can't do multiple things anymore. I just have to put something in that does this one thing.
And if you had to advise a new player on what's the most important question they should ask themselves when building a list, what would you be saying?
I think, am I choosing this because I have an emotional affinity to the unit, or am I choosing it because it's good? I've seen plenty of people, they put out a list or they say, hey, what's this list like? And you say, oh, that's not really a good choice. And they're like, yeah, but I love it. And you're like, okay, that's fine. You can play it because you love it. But like when you're trying to, say, is it a,
tell me that before you ask for advice, you idiot.
Is it a well-rounded list or not? The answer might be no, because they've just chosen this because they like it, which is a totally fair reason to choose it. But understand that, right? Because you can also play around that. You can choose things for emotional reasons. You just have to understand, what the deficiencies are, and then play around with that.
Do you think your list building's evolved over time? Do you think it's changed over the years you've been playing Kings?
For better or for worse, probably. I think I take less variety in my lists now. But maybe that's a byproduct of me understanding what works for me, and honing on that rather than just I don't know, being a bit more boring with it. I tend to find I take a lot more 3 and 4 obs rather than a lot of 1 or 2 obs that I used to take quite a while ago, which, again, that copy paste criticism comes in, sure, but when I find something that works for me, I do like it. But then I do make changes out that make sense. So Rhino Cav are so good, but I do like to have that one horde of tyrants because they can charge a little bit further with the mead, but also they can fit in places that Rhino Cav can't.
All right. Well, with that, let's slide into a commercial break. And when we come back, we'll talk about Luke's Clash of Kings list.
Hey, this is Mike Rossi, fourth Mike on the Unplugged Radio podcast, Dash 28 contributor, giant nobody, Oscar the Grouch lookalike, and you're listening to Countercharge.
And welcome back. Now, Luke, for those that haven't heard our Clash of Kings episode, we might get you to go through your list again, and then we'll kind of pick it apart a little bit as an example of how you go about your list building.
So this is a bit of a change from a list I won BrizCon with a few months ago, which was an almost all flying Green Lady Alpha list. So I already had all the birds and all that painted, and I wanted to take something to Clash that wouldn't take much painting to get ready, but also, I didn't want to do the full go quite that far with flying BS. So I thought, the formation might be a fun way to scale the flying back a little bit. And since I'd already had a regiment of orders done, it wasn't too much painting effort from there. As a sort of side benefit, I've posted a list similar to this in Countercharge After Dark, and everyone trashed it and said it was awful. So this is a nice big, nice big middle finger back at them for doing well with it. So that's just a little bonus. So this is my Order of the Green Lady list, which I called Order of the White Lady. No racial undertones there. It's the snow and ice. I'm not trying to be weird with it. So it's got 4 hordes of Forsaken, 3 Pegasus. So the hordes all have the Vial of Sacred Water as well, which is very important for both the heal and the Sacred Water keyword. 3 Pegasus. I've got a Druid with a red command dice, Conjure Staff, Heal, and Bane Chant. I've got the Avatar of the Green Lady and the formation. So the formation is the 2 hordes of water elementals, a greater water elemental, and a devoted. Cool thing about this is that the formation all gets wild charge 1, so they can charge 15 inches. And the devoted gets an aura for waterbound of thunderous charge +1, and the devoted gets inspiring built in, because normally devoted don't get inspiring; they have to buy it. And the devoted there has Surge, Bane Chant, and Heal.
I'm wondering, first up, how key you felt getting them all the Vial of Sacred Water on your hordes was.
I in this particular list, with the way I ended up playing it, it wasn't hugely important. It was very nice to get that extra bit of healing. There's enough healing and Radiance of Life getting around to get them close to fully back. So, it's just a nice thing to get that extra 1 or 2 wounds back with the Vial. The key in Green Lady, though, is that that gives you the Sacred Water keyword, and Devoted's Radiance of Life works on Sacred Water, and so does the Greater Earth, the Greater Water Elemental's Radiance. That works on Sacred Water and Waterbound. Turns out, though, like just with the way I played it, the Forsaken weren't often with the Greater enough for the Radiance of Life to matter a huge amount from them. They were often more sort of with the Green Lady, but it did happen sometimes, right? So the Sacred Water on them did come into play for the Radiance. So I think, unless you're really, really scrounging for points, I think it is pretty important to give them those vials.
I guess it's a little bit hard to change the list over time when it's been finalised the week before. So there weren't really any big changes from inception to getting it on the table.
No, I had one practice game with Adam, the night of list submission, and I actually thought I caught a stupid, which is what you want those practice games to do. And I changed the list on the fly as we were playing, and then I realized that I nearly made a stupid by doing that because I hadn't considered something else. And I had to change the list back. But it was lucky that we did that because Otherwise, I might have just before the submission made what I originally thought was the mistake and changed it, and then actually introduced a mistake into the list from there, which would have been pretty bad.
So take us through the list. It helps when there is the multiples when we're doing this bit on kind of how you see their role being when you are building the list and like what each is meant to do, I guess, as its primary role, and then perhaps what else it can do.
Yeah, sure. So the 4 Forsaken, funnily enough, I did actually toy around with changing to like a redemption or regiment or something like that. The Foot Knights. But then my intended joke wouldn't have worked because I really wanted to call these units 1 Saken, 2 Saken, 3 Saken, 4 Saken. And I thought if I don't have 4 of them, I can't make the joke. So I had to turn it.
That was one of your best on all your named lists. It was definitely one of your best.
I was pretty proud of that one, but that's why there's 4. There was nearly a knight regiment in there, so there we go. So I mean, there's no, there shouldn't be any surprises as to why these are in here. They're speed 10 flying, and they hit like a ton of bricks. Traditional large infantry, defensive stat line of def 5, unit strength 3, 18 attacks, and 15, 17. So, they can fly where they need to be. They only really need to land. They don't need to maneuver to get there. And they hit hard over a 20-inch charge range. So obviously their primary role is to kill things and to add unit strength to where it needs to be. I do throw them away sometimes. Hopefully, though, when I throw them away, it's more of I can grind out for a few turns and delay you before they finally die. I'm not hoping to have them, just go in, get charged once and die. I do everything I can to avoid that from happening. So even when I am trying to use them as chaff, I'm trying to get it done in such a way that they can at least last a couple of turns. So then I've got the 3 Pegasuses. Everyone, first looks at them as a piece of chaff, which they are, but at 80 points, speed 10, nimble fly, pathfinder, hitting on 3s with thunder 1. They're really great if you can sneak them into a flank or into a rear charge or into ground a flyer with just a wound to the front. So that's already multiple uses for them. And then there's you probably don't want them to die because they're really great end game at flying around and landing on objectives, adding unit strength to different zones to make sure you can test it to win it, picking up tokens, and running away and that sort of thing. So they're just all-round great units. Don't deploy them behind things that are going to give them cover. Don't run them out in front of your army if the opponent has shooting. You only put them out when you really need them to be out, and otherwise you hide them because they are one of the best things in the list and they're very valuable. Following that, I'll skip over these 2 heroes and I'll go to the formation. How about that? So the formation's in there, which gives us the 2 hordes of the water elementals and the greater. They go in a block with the devoted to give the thunder aura. They're tanky, so they're def 5-17 with regen 5 on the hordes, and it's defense 5-18 with regen 4 up and radiance on the greater. So they've got a lot of grind in them. So but with the 15-inch charge range and the terrain mitigation built in with the Strider, their job is to find the tricky part of the board where there's some terrain that I'm going to have to deal with, and make that terrain not be a problem. They're pretty good at killing phalanx. Obviously, they lose the thunder when they hit phalanx to the front, but with a Bane Chant, you still crush 2 or crush 3 into those bulwarkers or whatever. Anyway, and I had a practice game. I had a horde and a greater front charge, a bulwarkers regiment with a Bane Chant, and they took it off. So they get that job done where the Forsaken would have just bounced off that bulwarker unit for several turns. So having something that's not cav in the list to deal with those units is a really great boon. And then they can just grind out for days as well. So they're quite good as a bit of an anvil. But really, I do want to charge things and kill them and move on with this list. I don't want to be getting stuck into a grind fest. So for me, this unit, the real key is that Strider and the built-in crush to punch through units. The Devoted and the Druid both have Heal and Bane Chant. I think Bane Chant's key to this list. Two sources of Bane Chant that are pretty much guaranteed. I don't think I ever really failed to get it off because I would do the reroll, which now has to be the extra dice from the command. You can't use the reroll spells, but I would do the reroll on the Devoted's Bane Chant, and I would use the Contra Staff, obviously, on the Druid. So I'm getting Bane Chant 3 off from both of those sources through the games. So that's been really key in just sort of, getting 3s down to 2s to wound or that sort of thing, just making sure that I'm pushing through wounds to make those attacks really count. And that's the list. The Avatar, obviously, her heal and Cloak and Radiance works really well. Cloak pops Gnome Glass Shield, which Jan found out the hard way. And just putting guaranteed wounds down when you really get into the thick of the mix is really great. Otherwise, we've got the Radiance of Life for sustain against shooting.
I reckon there's plenty of people that have never encountered that Cloak popping the glass shield. Even though glass shield's a common item, Cloak of Death isn't actually that common. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's cool. I love that. And then what do you feel are the real strengths of this list? Like, what does it do absolutely really well? And then conversely, its weaknesses?
So it punches and heals really well. On top of the Radiance and the heal and the vials, there's also the Order that gives the regen to the Forsaken, which is really good. And obviously, with the fly already there from the Forsaken, if you're careful with your pegs, you can score late game really well. So you can always swoop in and steal tokens, objectives, and add unit strength for zone control. So it plays scenario quite well. It punches really well and it heals really well. It struggles with large amounts of chaff that are backed up by punchy stuff. So like Age's list that I played against, he had a lot of chaff and punchy stuff, and that was my draw for the weekend, because I had to sort of not just charge him in the face, because it never would have worked. There was enough chaff there to stop me charging his better stuff with a double charge and then being able to hit me back. It also struggles with just if there's lots of shooting, it's going to struggle, because if they can take off a unit in a turn, you can heal a lot, but you can't heal dead. So if they can actually shoot enough to take off a unit, you can't heal it back and it's gone. And that did actually happen to me. I think it might have been Steven shot off a unit on like turn 2, and I was like, oh yeah. That's really bad.
Yeah. Oh God, I'm hoping I remember to grab that soundbite now. You can't heal dead. Yeah, but it sounds like your other strategy, if anyone was trying to emulate your list, is also be careful where you're pegging.
Yeah. Always be mindful when you're pegging.
Yeah. Do you do predetermined strategies, or is it too much of a combo of terrain, scenario, opponent?
Yeah, I mean, for deployment, I just wing it and see. I'm not usually predetermined, other than obviously the formation. The Pegasus go behind a Forsaken Horde, pretty standard way that I deploy, because I want them protected. But it is around the opponent, the mission, and the map. With combat strategies, though, as the game progresses, one thing I'm always looking for with this kind of list is multi-charges. If I can't pop a unit the turn I charge it, I'm probably in a lot of trouble. Unless, sometimes I do make those charges, and it's a calculated of, I'm going in with this one here because I need wounds on it for next turn, and you're unlikely to kill me back, and I need this unit held up while my other units do this other thing. So sometimes it is a calculated thing of a charge that I know I won't kill the unit, but usually it's I want to charge things with 2 or 3 units, and I want to kill it, and I want to move on from there. The other thing with like all the flyers is I'm on the lookout for flanks constantly, and I'll position myself so that if you move here or there, or if you forget this or that, then I get a flank. Or forcing you to move somewhere you don't want to move to cover a flank because you don't want me flanking that unit. I'll do those sorts of things, which involves a lot of sidestepping and sort of a lot of like really weird, like, okay, I'm going to mark this unit because I've got to make this move, and I've got no idea if I can land where I want to be able to land with it. So I'm just going to mark this, and then I'm going to see if I can make this move work, which gets a bit tiresome. Maybe I'll stop playing so many flyers just because that aspect becomes so tiresome after a while, because I'm just constantly doing it.
Well, it's so much more important, right?
Yeah, and then there's other things to think about, like, what if I can back, instead of just countercharging, what if I back this unit up does that give me clearance for another unit that's fresh and maybe has its thunderous charge up to come in its stead, and I can position that unit that backed up ready to do something else next turn, or what a lot of people don't tend to see against this kind of list is they'll set up their battle line because they go like, oh, if you charge that there, I've got this, and then you charge that there, I've got this or whatever. But I'll do crossovers. So I'll go like my unit on my left is going to charge your unit on my right, my unit on my right is going to charge your unit on my left, and cross them over that way because it's more advantageous. Usually that comes in the form of, if it's a multi-charge, do they stack to the left or the right of the other unit that's going in? Usually that's what it changes. Because then people think, oh, if they charge me there and they kill that unit, now I've got a flank charge on this. But if I do the crossover charges, now I'm often covering that flank, and they're like, oh, crap, that's,
that's
now that's no longer good for me. So that's a really
that avenue dried up.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, nice. And what's your favourite unit in the list? I'm going to put money on you're going to say you love your peg action.
Well, it's funny you say that because the obvious answer is Forsaken, because there's 4 of them and they're a fantastic unit. But yeah, I think my favourite unit is the Pegasus, just because of how clutch they are. Like, Pegasus win games. Knowing when to save them, when to keep them alive, when to throw them in is what makes and breaks games.
And when it comes to scenarios and this list in particular, is there a scenario that you think like it does struggle more with? Is there anything you didn't want to see on the list for the weekend?
Well, I never want to see smoke and mirrors because it's such a painful scenario to do. I'd rather fool's gold. But with this list, like, I think it is matchup dependent for sure. I can't really pinpoint a list like a scenario that I think is particularly bad for me. I think stockpile. Well, even push is fine, right? Because I can put them on water and happy days. They can't march or whatever. They're slowed down when they got a token, but they're already slower, so it doesn't really matter. We can just shamble them across the line, no problem. I think token scenarios in general would be the worst scenarios for this kind of list, with stockpile probably being the worst of those, just because you have to sit there for several turns or do handoffs and that sort of thing. Whereas I'd much rather something like loot, where there's the three loot tokens, and I just have to sort of punch you away from them and come in and pick them up with something.
Yeah, fair enough. And what about its best?
I think something like, like Raise, where you can just get to points early and burn them
off, and
or even pillage and those sorts of scenarios. Actually, maybe Fool's Gold and Smoke and Mirrors might be considered pretty good, just because you have to guess early game where things are going to be, and then when they're not there, you have to reposition. And this list repositions quite well, so it's probably a reasonable scenario for this list as well.
What would be the one style of army you would really not want to come up against?
Oh, the one would have to be probably like a really heavy goblin shooting style list that has enough shooting to take off units in a turn, but enough, high nerve chaff sort of units to stop me being able to get in the mix and just delete things. Also, like when you got that many war machines, you can't just like be killing them every turn, because they've got all their unit strength things that can be killing you. So it's
any player worth their salt would be set up to counter that right immediately.
Exactly.
So
so that's probably the worst. Other than that, things like 14 or 15 plus drop lists, so listed out drop me but have lots of chaff and punchy stuff, means that they can layer, and I can never really get a good charge. If I can't get a good charge, I can't win games.
What about something like a triple weakness list, given how important like getting your Bane Chant off is? And sure, you might get it off, but if it was bringing it back to neutral, like do you think any of those lists that can do something like that would be pretty tough?
If it's paired with like Def 6 or something, it could be a bit of a struggle. But I've played against weakness a fair few times, and with similar lists to this, and it just never really seems to pan out to be that bad for me. Damo had 2 weakness. I think.
Okay.
I think actually Didn't Age have a couple of weakness and a scorched earth as well?
He had a scorched earth at least, I think.
Yeah.
Oh no, he does have weakness because the Siren has weakness.
Yeah. So I played against that sort of stuff on the weekend, and granted I did draw against Age, but that was going to happen regardless of the weakness, not because of it. Yeah, I don't know. Like it sucks, but it's not the end of the world.
We know how it's performing. Do you plan to take this army any further? Will you keep running it a while, or you like to change it up enough that it'll go back, into storage for a bit, or be used as something else? What's next plan for it?
In its current form, I might run it at full con, just because it's there ready to go. But if I can get a bit of hobby time out, I'll probably just run base Northern Alliance. This, as I've said a few times, this army is a multi-use across several Mantic factions armies, so the army will keep getting developed. The model grouping that I have will keep getting developed and played as things. I'm just not sure how soon I'll come back to Green Lady.
Well, we might take a brief break there, and when we come back, we'll close out the show and we'll do our traditional 10 rapid-fire questions.
My name is Stephen Devonish. I'm the 2023 Australian Master, and you're listening to Countercharge.
And welcome back. All right, you ready for these ones, Luke? You got to give your first answer that comes to you. And yeah, and then after that, you're free to go after a couple of hours on a Sunday night.
Yeah.
So first of all, what's your favourite army, meaning faction?
Tough one. Salamanders?
Nice. Your least favourite scenario?
Smoke and Mirrors.
What drives you, creativity or competitive?
The competitive side, but also how quick can I paint it?
Fair enough, yeah. Yeah. When your opponent rolls snake eyes?
Opponent. Ouch. Sorry, mate.
When you roll snake eyes?
Can I swear?
Absolutely. I'll just have to sword clank you.
It goes, for fuck's sake, of course.
What is your favourite hobby material?
Well, media, James Wapple, and tools, speed paints.
What's your biggest gaming pet peeve?
Knitting counters.
If you had to replace miniature wargaming with another hobby, what would it be?
Probably computer games.
What other miniature wargame would you not want to play?
Old World. I really wanted to like it, but it's awful.
Yeah, okay. And if you had a romantic evening with Ronnie Renton, which word is you may get next year, what would you whisper sweetly to him?
Nameless for firefight.
Right, well, that's going to wrap us up, mate. Do you have any shout-outs or anything you want to give before we...
Yeah, in Toowoomba, we've got Full Con on the 5th and 6th of April. That's going to be one day of Kings of War, 3 games on the Saturday, and a day of Firefight, 3 games on the Sunday. So that's the 5th and 6th of April in Toowoomba. And then after that, we've got BrizCon. This is not in the first weekend of May like we thought it was going to be. This is going to be on the 17th and 18th of May. So that's a 2-day tournament. I think we're doing 5 games, 17th, 18th of May, BrizCon.
Awesome. Okay. And for me, I think what we want to shout out is keep your eyes peeled. We'll have an upcoming hobby challenge. We've got the Narrative Workshop boys working on it, and hopefully we'll get a date for you soon. But otherwise, nothing else from me. And until next time, keep countercharging.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Countercharge. Please let us know what you thought of the show by emailing us at counterchargepodcast@gmail.com, on Twitter at countercharge15, or by commenting on the Countercharge Kings of War podcast Facebook group. If you enjoy the show, you can help others find out about it by leaving positive reviews on iTunes. Until next time, keep countercharging. Music is a composition of Kevin MacLeod and is licensed under Creative Commons.